You don't come to know yourself through comfort. You don't grow when everything is predictable. The truth is, most people only begin to awaken when something forces them to, when the pain finally outweighs the illusion. And that's often what the narcissist represents. Not just a destructive person, but a disruption, a rupture in your emotional reality that wakes you up to something that was always there, but hidden beneath the surface. Now, it might sound harsh to say that God allowed this person to come into your life, but there's a psychological and spiritual layer to this idea that most people miss. God, or if you prefer, the deeper intelligence that undergirds life, doesn't always shield you from suffering. Sometimes He allows the very thing you fear to enter, not to destroy you, but to expose what you need to confront. In that sense, the narcissist is not just a tormentor, they're a mirror. They do 1,000 times the things that they do. They tell you the things that you need to confront. In that sense, the narcissist is not just a tormentor. They tell you the things that you need to confront. Think about what narcissistic abuse actually reveals. It reveals your boundaries or lack thereof. It exposes your need for validation, your fear of abandonment, your desire to be chosen even when it costs your peace. It surfaces your old wounds, often rooted in childhood or formative relationships, that you've carefully buried under layers of performance and self-sacrifice. But those wounds can't be healed if they remain hidden. And that's why the pain matters. That's why it's permitted. God isn't punishing you. He's presenting you with a moment of reckoning, a spiritual x-ray that shows you what's broken, not so you collapse under the weight of it, but so you finally do the work to repair it. Real healing doesn't come from avoidance, it comes from radical honesty. And that often starts with the question, why did I stay? Why did I tolerate what I knew deep down was wrong? This is where responsibility enters the picture. Not blame, but responsibility. And the distinction is important. Blame keeps you trapped in the past. Responsibility empowers you in the present. When you begin to see the narcissist not just as a villain, but as a catalyst, you step into a different level of maturity. You realize that your healing isn't dependent on their apology. Your growth isn't delayed until they see your worth. No, the process of becoming begins the moment you stop making them the center of your story. And that shift is profoundly spiritual. Because when you stop making the narcissist the source of your identity, your emotions, your hope, you begin to reconnect with something higher. You return to God. Not in some abstract, distant sense, but in the form of truth, the truth of who you are, the truth of your worth, the truth of your limits, the truth of your purpose. God often speaks through disruption. And when everything inside you breaks, your self-commission, your assumptions, your relationships, it's often because something truer is trying to emerge. The psychological term for this is disintegration. But disintegration isn't the end. It's the beginning. The breakdown precedes the breakthrough. The loss clears space for the real. And here's the paradox. The very person who wounded you may have unknowingly served your highest good. Not because they were righteous, not because their behavior was excusable, but because the pain they caused finally drove you back to the truth. And the truth is, you were never meant to be defined by someone else's dysfunction. You were never created to carry someone else's brokenness as your responsibility. You were never born to dim your light for the comfort of someone else's ego. But you had to see that. And you couldn't see it while you were asleep to it. So pain became the teacher. And if you let it, pain becomes the purifier. This is why God allows certain people into your life, not forever, but for transformation. You're not supposed to stay in the lesson, you're supposed to learn it. And once you do, you no longer need the teacher. So the next time you ask, why did this happen to me? Reframe it. Ask instead, what did this awaken in me? And then pay attention to what answers rise up. Not from fear, not from ego, but from the part of you that knows. The part of you that was never truly lost, just buried. Let me leave you with this. What if the very pain you thought was going to destroy you is the pain that God will use to rebuild you, this time on a foundation that can never be shaken? When someone deeply harms you, especially someone like a narcissist who manipulates, devalues, and uses you, it often feels like your world is falling apart. But here's the difficult truth. Not every loss is a tragedy. Some losses are actually a form of rescue. Not all endings are a curse. Some are a correct. What we often interpret as rejection is in fact protection. And in the case of a narcissist, when they leave or when the relationship finally implodes, it may be one of the clearest signs that God has stepped in to protect your future. Because let's be honest, if it were up to you, you probably would have stayed. Maybe not because you were happy, but because you were attached, emotionally entangled, spiritually worn down. Narcissists have a way of disorienting your sense of worth slowly over time. They create a kind of psychological fog that convinces you that abuse is normal, that you're lucky they tolerate you, that somehow everything is your fault. And in that confusion, you begin to shrink. You stop dreaming. You silence your voice. You compromise over and over again until you can barely recognize yourself. And here's the tragedy. You begin to confuse survival with love. But God sees the whole story. He sees not only who you are right now, but who you were created to become. And sometimes, in order to preserve that future, to preserve your calling, your peace, your voice, He has to remove what you would not. The narcissist, in that sense, becomes an obstacle to your destiny. Not just because they're difficult, but because they fundamentally deny your humanity. They twist it, they take your empathy and turn it into a tool for control. They take your hope and turn it into a prison. That's not love, that's spiritual sabotage. So when God removes someone like that from your life, don't rush to fill the silence. Don't run back out of loneliness. And don't romanticize what you know was toxic. Because behind the heartbreak, there may be a deeper wisdom at work. Think about the long arc of your life. Not just the next few weeks or months, but the person you're meant to be 5 years from now, 10 years. Would that version of you, stronger, wiser, more aligned, thank you for going back? Or would they say, that was the moment I finally stepped into who I really was? See, we don't usually recognize divine protection while it's happening. It feels like devastation. It feels like abandonment. But later, once the dust settles, we begin to see it clearly. We realize the narcissist wasn't just draining us emotionally, they were slowing our growth. They were stalling our purpose. And in that sense, their exit was not just relief, it was release. Release from a pattern, from an illusion, from a cycle that would have kept you small. And don't underestimate what you gain in that release. You gain clarity. You gain space to think again, to feel again. You regain your emotional bandwidth, your mental energy. You can finally hear yourself, your real self, without the static of their manipulation. And that is sacred space. That is where God begins to reintroduce you to your own soul. Because here's what many people miss. Your destiny is never dependent on someone who doesn't respect your worth. If they could block your calling, they would have become your God. But they're not. They're just a person, flawed, broken, and yes, even dangerous, but still under the jurisdiction of a higher authority. And when that authority says enough, things begin to move, often in painful, confusing ways. But they move for your sake. You weren't created to be someone's emotional hostage. You weren't meant to spend your life contorting yourself to earn basic decency. That's not strength, that's survival. And while survival may be necessary for a season, it cannot be your destination. You are not here merely to endure. You are here to become, to build, to shine. And for that to happen, the environment has to change. Sometimes that means people have to go. And when they do, you don't have to curse them, but you also don't have to chase them. You can let them go with clarity, with truth, with gratitude for the lesson, and with full awareness that your destiny is too important to be tied to someone who cannot honor it. So don't see their absence as a failure. See it as alignment, a realignment of your life with God's vision for your future. Because when the narcissist leaves, your soul returns. And that, perhaps, is the greatest rescue of all. Let that truth settle into your spirit and then move forward. No longer as the one who was hurt, but as the one who was kept. Pain has a peculiar way of uncovering the truth. Not the kind of truth we like to tell others at dinner parties, but the deep foundational truths about who we are, what we've accepted, and what we've forgotten about ourselves. When someone like a narcissist wounds you repeatedly, the initial response is often confusion. You ask, why is this happening? Or what did I do wrong? But there comes a point, usually after the emotional chaos is settled, when the question becomes, who am I without this? And that question matters, because what often happens in relationships with narcissists is not just emotional injury, it's identity erosion. Slowly, subtly, they reshape the way you see yourself. They insert doubt into your mind, chisel away your confidence, distort your perception of reality until your inner voice sounds like their criticism. And by the time you realize how far you've drifted, the person staring back at you in the mirror feels like a stranger. This is where the pain becomes revelatory, because pain, when it isn't numbed or denied, demands honesty. It brings you face to face with the reality that you've been tolerating something unworthy of you. That somewhere along the way, you stopped protecting yourself. That you made yourself small to keep the peace. And that's where God often intervenes, not by removing all the pain instantly, but by allowing the pain to wake you up. Now that sounds harsh at first. Why would God allow pain instead of shielding you from it? The answer, while difficult, is rooted in love. Real transformation rarely happens in comfort. Comfort tends to breed complacency, but discomfort, that sharp jolt of reality, forces change. It shakes the illusion, and in doing so, it exposes the false identity you were living under. See, narcissists don't just lie to you about who they are, they lie to you about who you are. They convince you you're too emotional, too needy, too much, or worse, not enough. And if you hear those messages long enough, you start to internalize them. You begin editing yourself, censoring your truth, You think staying silent will earn you love, that behaving perfectly will avoid conflict. But what you're really doing is abandoning yourself for the comfort of another person's approval. God doesn't want that for you. So when he allows the pain, it's not to destroy you. It's to awaken you, to pull you out of the fog and remind you that your worth is not negotiable. Your voice is not optional. Your identity is not up for debate. The suffering doesn't define you, it reveals you. It shows you where your boundaries were never enforced, where your self-respect was traded for validation, where your soul was starving for truth. And once that awareness settles in, something shifts. You start to reclaim what was lost. You speak a little more boldly. You say no when it's uncomfortable. You listen to your intuition again instead of brushing it aside to keep the peace. That's not just healing, that's resurrection. It's the return of the self. And it's not accidental, it's intentional. Because God doesn't just want to rescue you from the narcissist, he wants to reintroduce you to you. That version of you, the one that knows how to walk away from abuse, the one that refuses to compromise dignity for attachment, the one that trusts God more than they fear loneliness, is who you were always meant to be. And it's often the fire of pain that forges that version of you. That identity is not just stronger, it's clearer. It's no longer built on someone else's perception, but rooted in divine truth. So, while the narcissist may have hurt you, they didn't get the final say. The pain they caused became the path that led you back to your real identity. And God didn't waste a moment of it. He used it all. Every tear, every sleepless night, every question, to shape a version of you that is no longer easily manipulated. That version of you can discern truth from charm. That version of you refuses to tolerate counterfeit love. That version of you is awake. And that is the very reason the pain was allowed. Not because you deserved it, but because something in you needed to rise. You are not who the narcissist said you were. You are who God is revealing you to be. Through the fire, through the questions, through the quiet voice that keeps saying, you are more than this. Let that voice grow louder. Let that truth settle deeper. Because your pain was not the end of your identity. It was the beginning of your return to it. And that, if you truly grasp it, changes everything.